people are sometimes not around labs. They don't live in a country where they have labs, or they don't have money to pay for labs because functional labs can be expensive. Very often, the first blood labs that a person gets is covered by insurance or is rather inexpensive and quite accessible around the world. However, the non-standard tests that are more functional, that are like, hair tests and urine tests and some of the other tests for things like immune function, antioxidants, and toxins and metabolism, many of the and mold, many of these are not available where a person is, or they're too expensive, and they're certainly not covered by insurance in most cases. And they can cost more than $1,000 for a person to get a workup and find out what's wrong and get started. So you haven't even started treating yet, and you've spent $1,000 plus on labs to find out what's wrong. And I think that's worthwhile for a lot of people, but in some cases, you can't really do much. So remember, I may be a doctor, but I'm not your doctor. So let's dive into what you can do when you have no access to labs or you've got a really minimal budget. So if a person has chronic illness of some kind, they've got some difficulties with some kind of chronic illness. And in America, that's often diabetes, that's insulin resistance, that's headaches, that's hormone disruption, that's chronic pain, sleep disorders, endocrine dysfunction, thyroid irregularities, hormone irregularities like menopause imbalances, problems with the period when you're having periods, sexual dysfunction. There's all kinds of things that are very chronic that are not supposed to be common in humans, and really aren't that common as long as you're pretty healthy. So some of the things that we can do are really simple, and I'd like to start with one of the easiest, which is I've got a couple of highlighters here. One is green and one is blue, and I'm not sure if you can see very clearly, but if you've got the ability to get some inexpensive blue blocking glasses, these were under $30, and you really can't see blue. You see kind of a muted gray. And if you can get blue blocking glasses, that helps me a lot in the world where I'm indoors. I'm inside windows that are, standard indoor windows in most countries block infrared and ultraviolet rays. So you're only getting your visual spectrum. And the blue light visual spectrum is even worse because it causes problems with part of the retinal ganglion cells. I've talked about this before with Alexis Cowan and Max Ghislaine and Jack Cruz. These doctors have really pioneered the understanding of light and what it can do to us badly and what it can do to us that's very, very good and beneficial. So it's really important to get some kind of blue blocking glasses for when you're indoors, especially when it's not noon, because very shortly your body thinks that it's noon if it sees blue light. In fact, blue light is something that fish and other animals that are deep in the ocean are primed to see, because blue light's the only thing that can penetrate through deep water. So that's part of how certain animals can develop a circadian rhythm, including us. And if we overdo blue light, not only will we screw up our circadian rhythm and think it's noon when it's not because of indoor lighting and light bulbs, and because of the thrust lately to put more efficient bulbs that emit mostly blue light and don't emit heat, so thus they are more energy efficient. That problem is very bad for biology because we really need that inefficient infrared light as well as a little bit of ultraviolet light every day. So not only does that screw up our rhythm so we don't know what time it is and our bodies can't get in a normal cycle for sleep, but it also destroys the blue chromophores that are in our retinas that can really wreak havoc on our bodies and cause diabetes by themselves without any food changes. So it's really important to know that we've got to block that blue light as well as go out and get some healthy ultraviolet and healthy infrared light from the sun. The other thing I want to talk about with regard to when you've got a low budget is you can often buy pH paper. pH paper comes in strips. It usually costs about less than $20. It's in a little roll like Scotch tape, but smaller. And it's pH paper. And you really want to be able to use this to test your morning saliva and morning urine, looking at 5.5 to 6.5 for urine and 6.5 to 7.5 for saliva in the morning with the first waking up. And that's done with little paper. Now you want to make sure the paper, at least I like to make sure that my paper has increments of 0.2 instead of 0.5. So you want 0.2 increments. So, 7.2, 7.4, 7.6, 7.8, 8.0. You don't want 7.0, 7.5, 8.0. That's too broad a color difference. And so what'll happen is you'll put this in your mouth or you'll dip it in some in a container if it's urine, and you'll look at it and compare it to a color strip on the container, and that'll help you know what the pH is, how acidic or how alkaline it is. If it's very low, less than 7, it's acidic, and if it's more high, above 7, it's more alkaline. And that scale goes from 0 to 14, with 7 being right in the middle, and that's the pH of neutral water. So you want to be able to find out how your pH is, and that's a pretty cheap way to do it. Another thing that you can do that's really, really useful that I like a lot is to go to a website, and there's many of them, but I tend to use ruled.me, RULED.me, M-E, and that's a free keto calculator where you can put in your body weight, your body fat percentage, your height, your gender, your activity level, your goals, all the different factors of your life, and calculate what your macros should be for your desire. And the reason for that is there's a lot of different carnivore and keto diets, and keto diets can be for defeating cancer, they can be for gaining weight and bodybuilding, they can be for losing weight and burning fat, they can be for children that are growing, that don't want to lose weight, they want to grow, but they also don't want to get super fat, and they also don't want to have seizures. So we want to find an ideal range of what the macros are, which is the ratios of protein, fat, and carbohydrate for a person. And so they're not all the same. It depends on your goals. Your keto diet will be different if you're trying to lose weight versus gain weight. So you can calculate the amount of grams of fat and protein per day, the percentage of these per day, and the amount of calories. And you can calculate those because there's 4 calories per gram in protein and carbohydrates, 4, and there's 9 calories per gram in fat, and there's 7 calories per gram in alcohol. So if you've been trying to figure out how much am I getting in my day, that's a way to calculate it. So 4, 7, and 9. The amount of calories that people tend to need a day is around 2,000. There's a lot of discussion on whether a person needs 2,000 calories a day, and is a calorie a calorie? Absolutely not. There's certainly differences between the same amount of calories from fat and the same amount of calories from carbohydrates, especially refined carbohydrates. I've found that if patients will swap out the same amount of carbohydrates per day from a refined carbohydrate, milled and ground grains, beans, nuts, and seeds, and flour, into and convert it into, say, raw fruit or whole cooked root vegetables, they'll find that their body handles that completely differently. Likewise, if they reduce the lectins, likewise, if they reduce carbs completely and really just switch over to a fat-based calories, they'll find that they really don't have the same fat burning with the same amount of 2,000 calories per day. You can also look at a really nice calorie process there's a video by Zoe Harcombe, which is Harcombe. Zoe Harcombe has a great YouTube video. It's about 10 minutes long, called "A Calorie is Not a Calorie." And she does a great job of describing how 2 different women might look at their diets and eat a certain way, and one will gain weight by eating too little calories, and one will lose weight. So it's really important to understand that if you don't get it right, you can really mess yourself up, even if you're below the calorie count that you think you need, if you don't have your macros right: protein, fat, and carbohydrate. So again, this is all free. This is all cheap. This is all, less than $20. So we're talking about really, really, really cheap stuff. Body mass index, you can calculate body mass index. I don't really love body mass index because it was derived for herds of animals and designed to look at large numbers of people and animals. So I tend to use body fat percentage, which can be calculated with some really high-tech methods or some low-tech methods. For $30, you can buy a scale that will run electric current through your feet, and you can buy another one or the same one that will run electric current through your hands and your upper body, and you can average those and calculate them, and those can be fairly accurate. You can also use calipers. Calipers cost about $12 online, and they come with directions on how to measure on a bunch of different spots, like your abdomen, your arms, different places in your body, and you usually measure several different sites, more than 4 sites you're measuring, and you're trying to calculate, can you pinch an inch? How much can you pinch of this subcutaneous fat? That is extremely useful. I think that you can also get ketone meters. A ketone meter is really cheap. They're usually the same price as a glucose meter, only they add ketones, and they're about $20. The problem with the ketone meter is that it costs about, $6 a day to use it, if you're going to use it the way a typical new person in a keto diet might use it. Because if they check their ketones and blood sugar 3 times a day, they need 3 lancets, which are the little poker needles, and they need 3 strips, which are the strips that go into your into your machine once you collect a little blood spot from your toe or your finger or wherever. And so that's about $6 a day. So you might spend $6 a day for about 2 weeks to learn how your ketones work and to map how your body responds. There's also continuous glucose monitors. Those are more expensive and they last for about 14 days, but they have about a 10% plus or minus margin of error. So they can be quite variable. And bear in mind too that the first thing that changes in your body is not blood sugar or ketones, it's insulin. So you want fasting insulin first, and that's a blood test. And there's no meter for that right now, so you'd have to go to a doctor, although it is cheap. So it'd be nice to be able to get fasting insulin. It's also possible to biohack your sleep using some cheaper monitors. Now, the rings that are out there are $200, $300, $400, $500, and that can be fairly expensive, and they can require a subscription. However, there are some hacking tools that you can get where there's apps on your phone that are not completely accurate, but they have some use. And they're either phones that lie on the bed next to you, or that listen to your snoring, or that measure the movement in the bed, and they either lie on the mattress next to you, or they lie on a table next to you, and they measure different things. Those apps can be very cheap, or a few dollars per month, so that can be done quite easily. I think it's important to look at the fact that you can also now use AI, and I've been having a lot of fun by taking pictures of a person's diet, which means take photos of everything they've eaten, and then type into like Perplexity or ChatGPT or some other AI that you like, either free or paid, and type in a prompt that says, here are the foods that I've eaten in one day. Calculate the grams of fat, protein, carbohydrates, the calories of fat, protein, carbohydrates, the percentage of fat, carbohydrates, and protein, and the total amount of calories for this amount. And so what you'll do is you'll type in the food and the serving. So 1 chicken breast, 1 serving of asparagus, 1 cup of salad, half cup of blueberries. And you'd enter the entire day's food and beverages and estimating an amount. Now, you don't have to get a scale. Many of you can buy a $10 bakery scale and weigh your food, and some of you may need to do that. But you don't have to weigh your food. You can, but you don't have to. You can guess, and you'll get a reasonable answer out. And that reasonable answer will show you if you've got, less than half your calories from fat. And most people that are trying to overcome some kind of illness would do well, if it's a chronic illness, to try to get toward a more than 50% of their calories from fat and not from carbohydrates, even though that's what a lot of the recommendations make in the United States. So, check with your doctor and look at that. It's important to realize that family members may want a different diet. So you have to talk with your family about what you're going to eat, because if you're eating a different meal and your family members, when you sit down, all have a different food, it may be easier to have everybody change, or it may be easier to have different meals for everybody, because there's some people that are really holdouts and don't want to try that, and that's okay. So you've got to negotiate with your family about what you're going to eat. Are we going to have the same meal, or are we going to have different meals for different people? Because that can be a barrier if you sit down and have the same meals at the same time, because people are seeing other types of different things. I think it's also useful to know that measuring the vitals like blood pressure, temperature, respirations, and pulse, you can do this fairly easy with tools that are inexpensive. You can buy a manual sphygmomanometer, which is the blood pressure cuff that goes around your arm, and a stethoscope for about $20. And they're fairly accurate, and you can do it and do your own or have someone else do it for you. It's not automated. And the reason I encourage people to use the manual ones is they're more accurate, and you can do laying down and sitting up blood pressure measurements that you can't really do with an automatic machine. If you try to use an automatic machine and you go from laying down to sitting up or standing, the machine can't compensate and pump up fast enough to measure the difference between lying and standing. So that's why I tend to recommend it, and it's cheaper. Those automated ones can be $100. You can also get thermometers, digital surface thermometers, oral thermometers. These are $10. You can get a pulse ox that goes on your finger that detects your pulse and your oxygenation going through your blood with a red light. Those are $12, $16. And then we mentioned scales already that are about $30 to $50 that can measure your body fat percentage as well as your weight. The next one is pool walking. One of my favorite exercises is just walking or walking in a pool. So if you can find a public pool or a pond or somewhere that's safe and you can walk, it's very useful to exercise with just walking and walking in a pool. I often have people walk in a pool with, just ankle deep, knee deep, and then hip deep. and they walk forward, they walk backward, and they learn how to walk forward and backward in a pool, because it's much safer to walk backward in a pool than it is in, outside, if you don't know where you are, or you're not safe, you're not in an area where you can walk backwards safely. But in a pool, it's pretty safe to walk backwards usually. And then at some point, you can go above the waist and get to the chest and the shoulders and really get much more resistance. So you get a lot of bang for your buck, and it's very safe if you can walk in a pool. Sometimes the pool is heated and you've got a nice, comfortable pool. Other times the pool is not heated and it's cooler. That's great for mitochondria to get that cool water exposure. 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit is really good. That's really cold, but there are other pools that are warmer than that. There are heated pools, and that's perfectly great to do too, as long as you don't have a heart condition. I think it's also very useful to know that inexpensive things like Celtic sea salt, trace mineral supplements, clean saturated animal fats like bacon grease from clean pigs, egg yolks, butter, ghee, which is clarified butter. Some people use, I don't do it as much, but some people use vegetable sources like olive oil and avocado oil, coconut oil. These are all very useful to use, and they're better than seed oils, way better than seed oils. So it's important to know that. The other thing that people can do is intermittent fasting. Fasting is free. And there's many, many ways to do intermittent fasting, but the most common one is to try and get about 16 hours between the last meal at night and the next meal the next day. So that means you eat your dinner, you stop eating, you go to sleep, and then you wake up the next day and you count 16 hours from the previous meal the night before. And so that'll put you sometime in the late morning before you should have breakfast. So basically you're delaying breakfast and pushing it back a little bit. Now, this isn't always good for people that are really, really weakly hypoglycemic. If you tend toward hypoglycemia, the main reason for hypoglycemia is a metabolic problem that has to do with mineral deficiencies. So often, if you can get trace minerals like chromium and vanadium and zinc and magnesium and manganese and all these different trace minerals, over time you can have a lot more stable blood sugar and end up with the ability to fast and do intermittent fasting. Now, I tend to tell people that are new not to fast more than 2 days by yourself if you don't have somebody helping you. I don't think that an inexperienced person does well if they don't have help, if they don't know what they're doing. Now, I encourage people to be independent and free and not be dependent on their doctors, especially in the world today that we've created so many dependent patients. So I think it's important to realize that you can try stuff on your own, but realize that a person can die from refeeding syndrome if they eat too much too fast after being on a fast for more than a certain period of time. And it varies where that is, but it seems like it's around 3-4 days, maybe 5 days. It varies for different people. But you can actually die if you don't do it right. So be careful and don't fast without knowing what you're doing. I'm also a big fan of organ meat pills. Organ meat pills are basically ground up, usually cow organ meats, like hearts, livers, kidneys, pancreas, lungs sometimes. And those can be $50 a bottle. You can get them less. There are many companies out there that are much cheaper. They're $25 a bottle, and that might get a person through a month or more. I've also found that there's a lot of detoxes that are super cheap. Activated charcoal can be acquired for cheap. Glucosamine at Costco, you can get that for pretty cheap. Glucosamine and MSM. Turmeric, there's various forms of turmeric that range in expense, but turmeric is an inexpensive cleansing herb that many people use to reduce inflammation and to reduce toxins like estrogen and other types of chemicals that are in the liver. Many people use coffee enemas as a cleanse, and they use colonics and colonic irrigation. They get massage and lymphatic massage. They do dry brushing, skin brushing, dry brushing. They do bouncing on a mini trampoline. You can get a used mini trampoline for $20 from these sales places that sell used exercise equipment. You can also, rent one for a short period of time. Cold exposure, as I mentioned, is very useful between 50 and 55 degrees, or you can just immerse your hands or feet in a little bit of ice bath for a few minutes. That can be very good for resetting the mitochondria. Red light therapy, I mentioned before, you can buy red lights or just go out in the sun. I really think short exposures in the sun are really good depending on your skin type. And I really want to mention no seed oils. It's really important to get rid of seed oils. They're some of the worst things that a person can get in their lives. And I also want to add ox bile. Ox bile is different than organ meats because it's the bile from the ox. And it's a supplement that helps people who are starting a keto or carnivore diet be able to digest all those proteins and fats that they're not used to, because organ meats are pretty dense. And if a person's been pretty plant-based most of their lives and they start to take organ meats as their multivitamin, they might find that they can't digest many of the long chain fats and the very complex proteins that are in there. And they might need to do that. They might also need to get a collagen support for their bones and their discs and their tendons. Collagen is a different density of distribution of amino acids than regular skeletal muscle meat that you eat when you have a steak or chicken or fish. Organ meats and collagen are different. So very often you'll find that people that are switching to an animal-based diet need to have steak meats, which is muscle meats. They need to have organ meats, and they need to have collagen, which is like bone and hooves and tendons and ligaments and connective tissue, to really, really, truly be healthy. And I think especially if a person's been deficient. Lots of people like Anthony Chafee, the neurosurgeon, do a great job of saying that, meat is all you need and you'll be fine. However, if you're sick and you've already had bad discs and bad tendons and bad connective tissue, or maybe you've taken a fluoroquinolone antibiotic that has, like Cipro or some other drugs that have fluoride in them, they can really destroy your tendons, and it takes months and months to repair those tendons. And sometimes a person may need a little boron and they may need a little collagen to help repair those tissues and help those discs get better, because they're starting behind the 8 ball. They're starting deficient. A healthy person may be able to just switch to carnivore and be okay, but somebody who's already had a deficiency of these proteins and connective tissue may not be able to get by with just steak and just chicken and just meat. They may need some collagen. So that's my quick little hacks for low-priced, inexpensive things to do when you don't have lab tests and you want safe stuff that's generally regarded as safe. Thanks.